Hey y'all, it's me Amanda, the Lazy Stitcher, and today I'm going to talk to you about what books I read in January. So I thought I'd actually start with some stats about my reading for January. One thing to note is I didn't technically finish my, for 12 and 12 reading challenge. I didn't finish any of those books, but I did start one and I've already finished it now here in February. It's the 7th at this point when I'm recording this. Whatever, time's a social construct. Tell you just some quick stats. So I read 7 books in January, which is less books than I typically read. However, I read a lot of 500 plus page books. I went ahead and I tackled a bunch of long, chunky boys. I read 2,266 pages and I listened to 33 hours of audio. Now let's get to the actual books. The first book that I finished in the new year in January was The Clan of the Cave Bear by Jean M. Owl, we'll say. I don't know. I'm not one of my fortes. So this book is a longer book. I borrowed it from my friend Andrea, and it's basically it's taking place during like the Stone Age, kind of like really prehistoric civilization, and it revolves around a character named Isla, who is a Homo sapien who, after an earthquake, her family is killed and she wanders off on her own, lost and sad, and then she finds a Neanderthal clan. They take her in, and it's her story of her growing up with the Neanderthals. So now there's lots of details in this book about how these people lived, and I thought it was really cool. I liked most of that detail. I mean, you kind of zone out after a while because it's quite the chunker of a book. But it's hard to know how much of it is actually accurate. Like, for example, there are certain things mentioned about the Neanderthal characters and how they work in general, and it's like, I don't know how much of this, like, how much of this is true. Like, the Neanderthals had more of like a collective memory, like a genetic way of remembering things, versus Homo sapiens, who I guess are more elastic and able to learn things, like figure things out quickly. I don't know how accurate any of that is. If I were Neanderthal, I would maybe be offended, but there's nobody around to get that upset, I suppose. You know what I mean? So it's hard to know exactly like what's accurate about it. That said, I thought it was I mean, it's quite the book. It's quite the book. It's very much like an epic, kind of fantasy-esque historical novel. A heads up is a content warning about this book, and if you don't like content warnings, you can just skip a little bit ahead. This book is very rapey, so keep that in mind. Be careful. Something that you're like, no, I can't with that. That said, overall, I thought it was a solid and interesting book, and it was interesting learning about this whole society and all the people in it, and seeing Isla grow over time. It ends on a bit of a cliffhanger. I do have the second book borrowed as well, but I'll be honest, I don't have any plans of reading it anytime particularly soon, considering how long it took me to read this first one. I ended up giving it 4.25 stars because, it was a little bit better than a 4-star book, but I wouldn't consider this a 5-star for me personally. The next book I read was The Principle of Moments by Esme G.K. Pearson. Now, this book was the Illumicrate December pick, and unfortunately I found it disappointing. It's physically beautiful. This is the beautiful book. And it's quite a long one. It's, over 500 pages as well. And there are a lot of things about this book that didn't work for me. I'll be honest, like, this is a book that If I hadn't paid the Illumicrate subscription for it, I wouldn't have bothered finishing. I would have just DNF'd it, unfortunately. So basically, this is a sci-fi book taking place way in the future when Earth, I guess, people from, I forget exactly what happened to Earth. Something bad happened to Earth. That inevitably happens, right? In like any sci-fi. And the people of Earth settled on another planet, and then they got conquered by this like emperor dude. And that sucks because basically everyone on this not Earth planet that are human are slaves. And it sucks. We also have another plot line involving the early 1800s. I think it's like 1812, around there. I forget exactly. But we have this other separate plot line because one of the characters is, in fact, a time traveler. Obi, that guy. Asha, the other character, who's a slave, indentured servant, whatever terminology you want to use, on this other planet in the future, and somehow they're going to meet up, and that's the basic premise. I liked the way the author described her book as being like, it's part Regency romance and also, sci-fi and black, characters as the leads. And it sounds like fantastic, but the reality of this book just didn't do it for me, unfortunately. First thing I'll mention about this book is that it has a very YA feeling to it, despite the fact that this is advertised as an adult book. It just doesn't feel like adult to me. Just the way the language is used, the way the plot moves, it all feels and the way the characters are, it all feels YA. Which is fine. I like YA just fine, but like if you're expecting something adult and then you find out it feels more YA, that can be disappointing. Right? For example, early on in the book, there's these passages that you get from another character who's like chronicling what happened. And they describe the whole thing as like, oh, and then it was this epic story. And I'm like, ooh, that just made me cringe so hard. Immediately took me right out. I didn't like that, like, at all. And there's just, this book is supposed to have like a found family feeling, which I love found family, like one of my favorite tropes. But the problem is, I don't feel like it's at all earned between the characters. Like, there's not enough conversing between the characters to get that feeling of they have this real bond. We don't see enough of it. They do have some experiences together, but at the same time, I don't feel like we're really getting the bond between them through these experiences. It seems like stuff's happening to them, but we're not really getting a major bond, unfortunately. That part fell flat. And then we've got this whole other timeline, and there's a romance between Obi, the time traveler, and the Prince of England, which, okay, that's a choice, considering he was a real person. And I think he was a known womanizer, and, fine. I didn't mind the romance. However, I'll be honest, that whole 1800s plot line, I could have done without it. I don't think we needed to see it. I think what could have worked better would be the idea that, like, Obi is a mysterious character and we don't realize he's a time traveler, and we could slowly get pieces and clues that he's a time traveler and that there's somebody back in time that he cares about and wants to get back to, and then you could slowly reveal the romance. But up until then, I just did not know. That whole timeline plot could have been cut right out, and I don't think anything would have been missing. There's just a lot of things like that. And like, for example, Asha, her people are kind of like I said, they're essentially treated as slaves, but it felt like there was no, I felt like we didn't have enough time seeing what their lives were actually like. And for example, like, to give a random example, we've got the Hunger Games, which is this big authoritative regime, but like the characters, there were still cultures in the different districts. There was still a lot of like pieces and flavor to it, and like I didn't feel like this book had that. There was no like there's different races of, and like maybe not race, but like different species out there, but we never learn anything about what these different species are like or anything like that. It's just like there's lizard people, but we don't know anything about the lizard people. Like we don't even know, I don't know if we even learned what they're called. And I feel like that's kind of a disappointment with this book, is that we've got all this opportunity, but we don't get into, it's 500 pages and yet we don't get into the depth of like what is actually this world is like. So unfortunately I gave it 2.5 stars. Next I read Interesting Facts About Space by Emily Austin. Now this was my book of the month pick for January, and I was nervous because I'll be honest, I wasn't liking the look of any of those books that month, and I just went for this one thinking, you know what, let's just give it a shot. So this is pretty much entirely about a character named Enid, and it's a contemporary fiction. Enid is a lesbian who's deaf in one ear and probably autistic, and she has this unexplained phobia of bald men. And we're just going through and learning about Enid's life that explains some of why she is the way she is. And it's kind of like you're basically reading this book where you want the main character to go to therapy so bad because you're just like, man, you'd be doing so much better if you just went to therapy. You poor thing. Like, and the book starts off, and to give you an idea, this is meant to be a comedy. It starts off and she's been dating this woman and then finds out that this woman's actually married. And then her wife comes to her place and is like, I can't believe this. And she's like comforting her over this fact. And she's just like, I'm sorry, I really didn't know she was married. It's great. And like I said, you uncover more depths about her. And also this book has, in the more middle area, you start to feel, in the middle area, you start to feel like she's really getting paranoid and like you're worried that this is going to become a thriller. It's to a lot of true crime. Oh my God, I can't say it. True crime podcasts. And it's been causing her to be a little more paranoid, especially when you add in the phobia of bald men. But anyway, you get these pieces of it. It's a whole bunch of kind of different things, but overall it actually is lighthearted. Not to spoil it, it's lighthearted and sweet, and like there were certain character moments that got me really hard in this book. I really enjoyed it. I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. Next, I read the very much hotly, I don't know, debated and also anticipated, I read Fourth Wing. I got the version with the cool dragons, which is part of why I bought this. So, Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. If you're on the up and up with books, you probably know what this is and what it's about. But I will go ahead and tell you just in case. This one is romantasy, so romantic fantasy. And it is about a gal named Violet. She lives in a world where there is a constant war against one of their neighboring countries. They have griffins, but in her world, they have dragons, which is really awesome. And she has to go through this dragon school. And it is basically designed to kill off like a very large amount of the young adults who are trying to become writers. That's the word, writers. And of course there's a romance. There is a gentleman named Zayden, and his family, his dad was like a rebel. There was a rebellion, and of course they were all executed. They let the kids live, but they have this like mark that they have. They have a mark that shows that they're children of the rebellion, and they were allowed to live, but they also had to like try to become writers because it would probably kill off most of them with all seriousness. So that's the basic premise of this book. It's Violet and seeing how she survives. She also has, I forget exactly what condition she has, but she's in a lot of pain, and it is physically difficult for her to do a lot of these tasks. She was originally supposed to be a scribe, but she's like, okay, her mom forces her to do this. Her mom's like a top general, so there you go. Now, as a whole, I enjoyed this. Fourth Wing, it was fun, and there's lots of action, lots of stuff going around. There's a lot of death. There's a lot of characters dying. Not as much main characters, but nevertheless, don't get too attached to anybody initially, okay? And yeah, like I said, it's action-packed and it's fun. The romance is hot. I enjoyed it. Now, I did have some issues with this book. Now, it's funny, this book has a very high rating on Goodreads, and also Storygraph too. It's interesting. A lot of the people I know gave it 5 stars, absolutely loved and adored it. And then I have seen pushback, which is normal. Like, you get a book that's really popular and beloved, and you're going to get people who push back and are like, actually, I think that sucks. It's normal. There's another booktuber who I watch and I enjoy her videos. She hates this book. I wasn't sure how I was going to fall. And it's interesting because I'm kind of lukewarm about it. Or I enjoyed it. Let me correct that. I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it. And part of that is that I think the premise is kind of weird. Like, I genuinely don't understand why they just want to let all these young adults die. Like, you're having this war and you just want them all to, you don't do anything to like try to keep them alive. Because like, I could see it being a major pass fail. Like, oh, you failed, you have to be in the infantry, because they have other like branches of their military. You could be in a different branch without dragons. You know, you would think you'd want to prevent just needless death. We're gonna put a pin in that though, okay? All right, so that was that was one of the big things, but also I think I spotted a plot hole in this book. I'm not positive, and I can't talk about it without spoiling like the whole book, because it's one of the components of the end, and it goes into the second book. So I think there might be a big plot hole. Now, that's okay. I can still enjoy a book that isn't perfect and that has plot holes. However, I do kind of mentally recategorize the book, and I take it a little less seriously, I guess you could say, because of that. Anyway, I give it, I think, 4 stars. I forgot what was actually my next book, which was, I listened to as an audiobook, was Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. Now, this book is actually a modern, well, overall modern, I think it's kind of like 90s-ish retelling of David Copperfield, which I didn't know. And then someone told me and I was like, oh my God, how did I not notice that? Because I love Dickens. I love him. Like, you know, out of all the classics, it's Dickens and Austen are like my thing. So, but whatever. So it's basically about a gentleman who's nicknamed Demon Copperhead. He's actually, his name's really Damon. But anyway, you go through his life and he has a tough life. And he lives out, I forget exactly where he lives. I think it's in the Appalachian area. Because I think most of Barbara Kingsolver's books are in that general vicinity. And man, this poor guy, just like thing after thing for him. And you're just basically listening to him and hoping for the best for him and seeing how he gets through his life, basically, and the people who are also in his life. And you're kind of rooting for some of them too. It's a fantastic book. I highly recommend it. I gave it 5 stars. It's my first 5 stars of the year. I listened to it as an audiobook, as I mentioned. Fantastic narrator. It's a great experience as an audiobook. So definitely check that one out. And then I have my next book. I actually read these back to back, but you know, Demon Copperhead came in between because it's an audiobook. I read Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. This one is like this giant honker of a book. Like, what? Why are you so big? So, okay. Iron Flame. It's a continuation of Fourth Wing, obviously. It's like her second year of the dragon writer training. Now, I had more issues with this book, unfortunately. As a whole, like, it kept me going despite being very, very long. I do think it's way too long. I think you could have trimmed a lot of it. Like, the main conflict is very interesting, and I was looking forward to, like, where it was going, but there's so many side plots, and I think a lot of that could have just been snipped right out. It wouldn't have hurt the book. I also have weird random criticisms of this book. Like, for example, I actually think there's too many sex scenes. Like, okay, this is a preference, okay? So, like, this is an opinion and a preference. I think I like about 1, maybe 2 sex scenes in a book. Once you get more than that, I start to lose interest, and I start to be like, are we gonna actually get back to the plot now? Which, okay, I'm a romance girly and I love my smutty books, but like, I have a limit. Even I have a limit, okay? And there was a lot. And it wasn't like particularly inventive or anything either. Like, if they were getting kinkier and kinkier, that'd be one thing, but they weren't. So it was like, okay, we really don't need this much, okay? What I did like, we're going to take out that pin. I mentioned how in the first book, it's like, why are they just killing all these young adults, new adults? Why are they just killing them all? And it's actually kind of addressed in this book. I mean, they don't give a real why about it. They kind of do. But there is criticism of this, okay? Which I appreciated because there's a contrast in this book to the way a different set of people does things, and the way they do things is much less, like, ridiculous. So I enjoyed that. Yeah, I mean, it kept me engaged. I'm interested in knowing what happens next, but I do think it was too long. Oh, and there's also, this is a nitpick, like a nitpickier nitpick, which is that I don't like in both books, there's one stylistic writing thing where she puts a period in between each word to emphasize. I think that's okay to do like a few times, maybe 2 to 3 in a book, but she does it a lot, and I got a little sick of it. And this is an example. Burn it down. I don't need that. I don't like that particular writing stylistic choice, but whatever. It's nitpicky and it didn't bother me that much. So, if you're into romantasy, obviously you gotta check out Fourth Wing. And if you like Fourth Wing, Iron Flame is honestly not bad. I give it 3.5 stars. It's not amazing, but I enjoyed it. And I am curious about where this series is gonna go. I'm not, like, done with it or anything. But I will admit, it's not like... I don't think this is the pinnacle of fantasy, okay? I think there could be better. I'm curious about some other romantasy now, but I did it. I read some chonky books. My last book is another audiobook. I listened to None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. Now, first thing I'll mention about this. This book is fantastic as an audiobook because it's got a different narrator for each. There's 2 main characters. It's got a different narrator for each, but also because there's podcasts involved, there's these little clips where they got other actors to do it, and it's great. So this is a great audiobook experience if you're into audiobooks. None of This Is True is a mystery thriller, and it's about 2 women who find out that they're birthday twins. They were born on the same day, exactly, like same day, same year, in the same hospital. Don't worry, it's not a switched at birth story, okay? I'm going to bring that right out the gate. But these 2 women get to know each other because of that. And then one of the women, Alex, she's a podcaster. Her husband makes a good amount of money, but so she gets to live her dream being a podcaster where she interviews successful women. And then the other woman, Josie, is she was a stay-at-home mom, and she works part-time as a seamstress. And she wants Alex to do a podcast about her where she wants to talk about some of her hopes and dreams and what she plans in the future. And as you go through, it becomes, of course, more and more sinister. And yes, it's called None of This Is True for a reason. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. I am not much of a thriller girly, but every once in a while, I like to check one out. And this was it's on the newer-ish side. I'd heard a lot of good things. And like I said, highly recommended as an audiobook. So if you're into thrillers, here's something for you to check out. Okay, that's finally it. I took quite a while on all of those. It wasn't even as many books as usual, but I take my time apparently. So I hope you're all doing well. And if you actually made it this far, if you could give me like a heart, any color emoji, that would be really nice. It makes me feel like, oh, someone's actually watching. I hope you're all doing well. And bye bye for now.